My stepdaughter stole $50,000 from my savings. And when I caught her, my husband called me crazy and tried to have me committed to a psych ward. I evicted them both, but I am still shaking from the horror of what I found in my own home. My name is Eva, and I am writing this through tears because my entire reality has just shattered. For months, I thought I was losing my memory. I thought I was the problem, but it was all a lie. My husband, the man who held me when our baby died, was systematically poisoning me with hallucinogens to make me look unstable. His 24-year-old daughter was not just stealing my money, she was stealing my life, wearing my clothes and forging my signature while mocking me behind my back. They toasted to my downfall in my own living room. They planned to lock me away and sell my house to pay for their mistakes. I feel like my heart has been ripped out of my chest. How could I sleep beside a monster for 5 years and not know they are in jail now, blaming each other? But I am the one left alone in this empty, tainted house. I need to know if anyone else has ever survived something this cruel. Please tell me, did I do the right thing by destroying them? My name is Ava Vance. At 48 years old, I have spent the better part of 2 decades curating a life that, from the outside, appears impenetrable. I am a senior interior designer for one of the most prestigious firms in Connecticut, catering to the whimsical demands of old money families and new tech billionaires. I live in Greenwich, in a 6-bedroom colonial revival estate that sits on 3 acres of manicured lawn, a property I inherited from my parents. It is a house of marble floors, high ceilings, and echoing silence. My husband, Mark, and I have lived here for 5 years. Ever since the worst year of my life. That year is important. It is the context for everything that follows. 7 years ago, I lost our unborn son in the 3rd trimester. The grief did not just break my heart, it fractured my mind. I spent months in a haze of Valium and therapy, terrified of my own shadow, convinced the world was conspiring to hurt me. Mark was my anchor then. He was the calm voice that pulled me out of the darkness. He was the one who managed the bills, the doctors, and my inheritance when I could barely get out of bed. Because of that, I gave him my absolute trust. I gave him the benefit of every doubt. I should have known that blind trust is a luxury no wealthy woman can afford. The peace of my sanctuary was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The leaves in the driveway were turning a burning shade of russet and gold, a beautiful sight that was ruined by the presence of a battered Honda Civic parked crookedly next to my Range Rover. I stood in the foyer, watching Mark haul the 4th oversized suitcase through the front door. Behind him trailed Tiffany, his 24-year-old daughter from his first marriage. I had met Tiffany perhaps 3 times in our marriage. She was a girl of sharp angles and even sharper eyes, always glued to her phone, always chewing gum with an aggressive rhythm. Mark set the suitcase down with a heavy thud and wiped sweat from his forehead. He looked at me with those pleading, puppy dog eyes that had worked on me 1,000 times before. "Honey, I know this is sudden," Mark said, his voice dropping to a whisper so Tiffany would not hear, though she was standing right there, examining her fingernails. But her landlord was a complete tyrant. He kicked her out without notice just because she was a few days late on rent. She has nowhere else to go. I looked at Tiffany. She did not look like a victim of a tyrannical landlord. She was wearing a designer tracksuit that I knew cost upwards of $300, and her hair was freshly highlighted. She did not make eye contact with me. She just scanned the foyer, her eyes lingering on the crystal chandelier and the antique console table. "It is fine." "Mark," I said, forcing a smile I did not feel. Family helps family. She can stay in the guest wing until she gets back on her feet. Tiffany finally looked at me. Thanks, Ava, she said. The way she said my name sounded less like gratitude and more like a challenge. It lacked the title of respect, or even warmth. It was flat, dismissive. That first night, the house felt different. The air was heavier. I retreated to my master bathroom to go through my nightly skincare routine, a ritual that grounded me. I reached for my jar of La Mer moisturizing cream. It was a fresh jar, purchased just 2 days ago from Neiman Marcus for nearly $400. I treated it like liquid gold, using only a tiny amount each night. My hand grasped empty air. I frowned, looking at the marble vanity. Everything else was in place. The serum, the toner, the eye cream. But the heavy white ceramic jar with the green lettering was gone. I opened the drawers. Nothing. I checked the cabinet under the sink. Nothing. A cold prickle of irritation rose on the back of my neck. I walked out into the hallway. The door to the guest wing was ajar, and light spilled out onto the hardwood floor. I could hear music thumping softly. I walked to the doorway. Tiffany was sitting at the vanity table I had personally restored last year. She was applying a thick, generous layer of white cream to her legs. The familiar scent of lime tea and sea kelp hit my nose. My jar of La Mer was sitting open on the table, the lid carelessly tossed aside. Tiffany, I said, my voice tight. She jumped slightly, then turned around. Her face was a mask of innocent confusion, but her eyes were hard. What? You scared me. Is that my face cream? I asked, pointing to the jar. She looked at the jar, then shrugged. Oh, this? I found it in the bathroom. I ran out of body lotion, and my skin is super dry from the move. I did not think you would mind. It is just lotion, right? I felt my blood pressure spike. It was not just lotion. It was $400 worth of specialized skincare that she was slathering on her shins like it was cheap drugstore moisturizer. That is extremely expensive face cream. Tiffany, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, and it was in my private bathroom. You should have asked. She rolled her eyes, a gesture so disrespectful it made my hands shake. God, relax. Mark said you were uptight, but I did not think you were stingy. I will buy you another one when I get my paycheck. I knew she did not have a job. I knew there was no paycheck. I turned and walked to the master bedroom, where Mark was reading on his iPad in bed. I needed him to handle this. I needed him to set boundaries with his daughter. Mark, I said, standing at the foot of the bed. Tiffany went into our bathroom and took my La Mer cream. She is using it as body lotion. When I confronted her, she called me stingy. Mark lowered the iPad and sighed, taking off his reading glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture he always used when he wanted me to feel like I was being unreasonable. Eva, honey, he said softly, are we really going to do this tonight? She has had a traumatic day. She just got evicted. She is confused and probably grabbed the first bottle she saw. It was not a mistake. Mark, I insisted. She knew exactly what it was, and she was rude. Mark patted the empty space on the mattress beside him. Come here, sit down. I stayed standing. You know what this sounds like? Mark said, his voice taking on that condescendingly gentle tone he used with the doctors years ago. It sounds like you are spiraling. Remember what Dr. Evans said about fixation? When you get stressed, you fixate on small, controllable things because you feel out of control. I stared at him. I am not fixating. She stole my property. It is just a jar of cream. Ava, Mark said, his voice hardening just a fraction. I will buy you 10 jars tomorrow if it stops you from acting like this. Please, for my sake, do not make her feel unwelcome on her first night. Do not let the anxiety win again. You have been doing so well. He looked at me with pity. That was the weapon he used best. He did not yell. He weaponized my own history against me. He made my valid anger look like a symptom of my mental illness. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I looked at my hands. They were trembling slightly. Was he right? Was I overreacting? Maybe it was just cream. Maybe I was being the wicked stepmother. Okay, I whispered, defeated. I'm sorry. Good. Mark smiled, picking up his iPad again. Turn off the light when you come to bed. I walked to the switch, plunging the room into darkness. But as I lay there, listening to Mark's steady breathing, I could not close my eyes. My mind was racing. It was not about the cream. It was the look in Tiffany's eyes. It was the entitlement. And it was the way Mark had so effortlessly shifted the reality of the situation until I was the one apologizing. Somewhere in the deep, quiet corners of the house, I heard a floorboard creak. It was a sound I had never noticed before. But tonight, it sounded like the first crack in the foundation of my life. 7 days. That was all it took for the carefully calibrated ecosystem of my home to disintegrate into chaos. Before Tiffany arrived, my mornings were a symphony of quiet routines. I would wake at 6, drink hot lemon water, and meditate in the sunroom before heading to the office. Now, the mornings were characterized by the smell of stale pepperoni pizza and the sight of obstacles scattered across my pristine hallway. I walked into the kitchen on Tuesday morning, stepping over a pair of muddy sneakers that had been kicked off right in the middle of the foyer. On the granite island, a fortress of takeout boxes from expensive sushi restaurants and high-end steakhouses was piled high. I checked my banking app. All of it had been charged to the supplementary American Express card I gave Mark for emergencies. Apparently, spicy tuna rolls and Wagyu beef sliders constituted an emergency at 2 in the afternoon, which was usually when Tiffany finally dragged herself out of bed. I cleared the trash in silence. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. Mark had asked me to be patient. He had asked me to be kind. So I swallowed the scream building in my throat and went to work, telling myself that this was temporary. But that evening, the dam broke. I came home early from a site visit, exhausted and looking forward to a glass of wine. As I walked into the formal living room, my eyes immediately snapped to the beige linen sofa, lying there, crushed under the weight of a heavy fashion magazine, was my Hermes Birkin bag. My breath hitched. This was not just a bag. It was a $30,000 investment piece, made of ostrich leather that I had spent 3 years on a waiting list to acquire. I kept it in a dust bag, inside a climate-controlled closet, on a shelf high enough to require a step stool. I rushed over and lifted the bag. The hardware was scratched, but worse. On the bottom corner, there was a dark, sticky ring. It smelled like cheap beer and cherries. My hands started to shake. I felt a physical wave of nausea. It was the violation of it, the absolute lack of respect for my boundaries and my hard-earned possessions. I pulled out my phone. My first instinct was to check Tiffany's social media to see where she had been. But when I searched for her profile, nothing came up. She had blocked me. I felt a cold sneer curl on my lip. She thought she was clever. I switched accounts, logging into the business profile I used for my design firm. I searched for her name again. There she was. Her profile was public. I clicked on her story, posted 4 hours ago. There was Tiffany, posing in the bathroom mirror of a dive bar downtown. She was wearing my bag on her arm, her lips puckered in a duck face. The caption read, "My daddy spoils me. New collection added to the closet. Haters gonna hate?" The phone almost slipped from my sweaty palm. She was claiming it was hers. She was parading my property around dirty bars to impress strangers on the internet. "Tiffany," I screamed. It was not a polite call. It was a summons. I heard footsteps thudding down the stairs. Tiffany appeared in the doorway, wearing oversized sweatpants and a crop top. She was chewing gum, looking bored. "What is your problem? You are so loud," she said, leaning against the door frame. I held up the bag, thrusting the stained corner toward her face. "Did you take this out of my closet?" I demanded. My voice was trembling, hovering on the edge of hysteria. Tiffany glanced at the bag and shrugged. I needed something to match my boots. "You were at work. I did not think you would care." "You did not think I would care?" I repeated, my voice rising an octave. "This is a $30,000 handbag, Tiffany, and you dropped it in a puddle of sticky alcohol. Look at the stain." She laughed, a short, incredulous sound. 30,000 for a bag? God, that is obscene. You really have too much money if you are spending that much on a purse. Besides, it is just a little spot. It wipes off. Stop being so dramatic." "Dramatic?" I whispered. "I am not being dramatic. This is theft. You entered my private closet and took my property." Mark walked into the room then. He had just come from the garage, still wearing his golf attire. He looked between us, assessing the situation, and immediately moved to stand next to Tiffany. "What is going on?" Mark asked, his voice low and weary. "I could hear you shouting from the driveway." "She stole my Birkin." "Mark," I said, pointing a shaking finger at his daughter. "She took it to a bar and ruined the leather, and she posted it online, claiming you bought it for her." Mark looked at the bag, then at Tiffany. "Tiff, did you take the bag?" "I just borrowed it, Dad," Tiffany said, her voice instantly changing into a whine. "She has like 20 bags in there. She never even uses this one." I wanted to look nice for my interview today. It was a lie. There was no interview at a dive bar. Mark turned to me, his expression softening into that patronizing look of pity. "Eva, honey, look at her. She is trying to get her life together. She wanted to look professional. Maybe she made a mistake with the bag, but she is young. She does not understand the value of these things like you do. She is 24. Mark, not 4, I snapped, and she blocked me on Instagram so she could pretend it was hers. "You are spying on her social media?" Mark asked, his eyebrows raising. "That is a little paranoid. Do you not think?" I stared at him, dumbfounded. The conversation was shifting again. The ground was moving beneath my feet. "I am not the one on trial here," I said, clutching the bag to my chest. "She damaged my property." "Eva, listen to yourself," Mark said, stepping closer and lowering his voice. "You are shaking. You are obsessing over material objects again. It is just leather. I can pay to have it cleaned. But you cannot treat my daughter like a criminal in her own home. You are being petty." Petty. The word hung in the air like a slap. I looked at Tiffany. She was smirking behind Mark's shoulder, a small, triumphant curve of her lips that vanished the moment Mark turned to look at her. I realized then that I was alone in this room. There were two realities here. In one, I was the victim of theft and disrespect. In the other, the one Mark and Tiffany were constructing, I was the unstable, materialistic stepmother bullying a poor, defenseless girl. Fine, I said, my voice cold and hollow. I will have it cleaned, but stay out of my closet. If I catch you in there again, I am calling the police. Mark Seahill, shaking his head as if I were an unruly child. No one is calling the police. Eva, go upstairs and take a bath. Calm down. You are acting crazy. I turned and walked away, clutching my ruined bag. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Tiffany whisper loudly to her father, "See? I told you she hates me. She is totally unhinged." I reached the top of the stairs and stopped. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were rewriting the narrative in real time, and I was losing control of the script. I needed to stop reacting. I needed to start watching. The silence in my house was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. For the next 3 days, I moved through the hallways like a ghost, avoiding eye contact, speaking only when spoken to. Mark seemed pleased by my docility. He mistook my withdrawal for submission, believing that his little speech about my mental health had cowed me back into the corner of the obedient, medicated wife. He was wrong. I was not submitting. I was preparing. On Wednesday morning, while Mark was at the golf club and Tiffany was presumably asleep until noon, I allowed a man named David into the house. David was a private security contractor recommended by a discreet friend of mine in the legal sector. He wore a gray uniform that looked like a standard cable technician's outfit, a perfect camouflage. "I want them invisible, David," I said, standing in the center of my master bedroom. "I do not want a single blinking light, no beeping sounds, nothing that would alert anyone to their presence." David nodded, his face professional and grim. He installed 3 pinhole cameras. One was hidden inside the smoke detector, directly above my jewelry armoire. Another was concealed within the spine of a faux leather book on my husband's office bookshelf. The third was tucked into the ventilation grate of the master bathroom. As I watched him work, a wave of nausea rolled through me. I was planting surveillance equipment in the sanctuary of my own marriage. I felt dirty, paranoid, and deceitful. But then I remembered the smirk on Tiffany's face when she claimed my bag was hers. I remembered Mark's condescending hand on my shoulder. The guilt evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard need for truth. By Friday evening, I thought I was ready for whatever the cameras would show. I was not. The catalyst was the annual charity gala for the Greenwich Historical Society. It was the kind of event where appearance was currency, and I intended to wear the sapphire and diamond drop earrings my grandmother had left me. They were not just jewelry. They were family history, insured for $45,000, but priceless in sentiment. I opened the velvet box in the top drawer of my armoire. It was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that made my vision blur. I checked the drawer again. I pulled the entire drawer out and dumped the contents on the carpet. Silk scarves and empty velvet pouches tumbled out, but the sapphires were gone. I did not scream. I did not run downstairs to confront them. Not yet. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. My hands were trembling so badly I had to type my password 3 times. I accessed the secure cloud server where the hidden camera footage was stored. I navigated to the timestamp, Thursday afternoon, the window of time when I had been at a client meeting in Westport. I clicked play. The video feed showed my bedroom in high definition. Sunlight streamed across the duvet. The room was empty. Then, the door handle turned. My breath hitched, but the screen suddenly flickered. The image distorted, tearing into jagged lines of gray static. The time code at the bottom of the screen jumped forward by 20 minutes. When the picture stabilized again, the room was empty, but the top drawer of the armoire was slightly ajar. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. The camera had not malfunctioned. Someone had jammed the Wi-Fi signal. Technologically, Tiffany was a child of the smartphone era, capable of editing selfies and navigating social media. But she was not sophisticated enough to know how to use a signal jammer. That required knowledge of frequencies. It required hardware. It required Mark. My husband was an engineer by trade before he retired to manage his investments. He knew exactly how home networks functioned. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. The theft was bad, but the cover-up was worse. It meant they were working together. It meant my husband was not just enabling a spoiled brat. He was orchestrating a systematic looting of my assets. I felt a sudden, desperate need to wash my face, to scrub away the feeling of betrayal that was clinging to my skin like a film. I walked into the master bathroom. The bathroom camera had been installed in the vent, giving a bird's eye view of the double vanity. I reached for my toothbrush, an electric model with a replaceable head. As I lifted it, my thumb brushed against the bristles. They were wet. I frowned. I had not brushed my teeth since 7 that morning. It was now 6 in the evening. The bristles should have been bone dry. I brought the brush closer to my face. It smelled wrong. It did not smell like my mint toothpaste. It smelled chemical, sharp and acrid. It smelled like the toilet bowl cleaner I kept under the sink. I dropped the toothbrush into the sink as if it had burned me. A gag reflex seized my throat. I ran back to the laptop and pulled up the bathroom feed. I rewound to 2 hours ago. The signal jammer must have been turned off. Or perhaps the bathroom signal was on a different frequency they had missed. The footage was clear. Tiffany walked into my bathroom. She was wearing my silk robe. She stood in front of the mirror, applying my lipstick. Then, she picked up my toothbrush. She looked at it, a cruel little smile playing on her lips. She leaned down and scrubbed the inside of the toilet bowl with it. She rinsed it briefly under the tap, shook it off, and placed it back in the holder. She turned to the mirror and winked at her own reflection. I sat there, frozen. The violation was so intimate, so visceral, that I could not process it. This was not about money. This was hatred, pure, unadulterated malice. She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to degrade me. And Mark was letting her do it. A chime from my phone broke the silence. It was a fraud alert from American Express. Suspicious activity detected. Card ending in 4098. Transaction declined. $7,000 at Rolex Jewelers. The supplementary card. I did not decline the transaction. I let the anger clarify my mind. I needed to know the full extent of the rot. If Mark was stealing my jewelry and helping his daughter torture me, he had a reason. And in my experience, the reason was always money. I walked to Mark's home office. He was downstairs watching television with Tiffany. I could hear the laugh track of a sitcom echoing through the house. I entered the office and locked the door. I did not go for the filing cabinets. Mark was too smart to leave paper trails there. I went to his desktop computer. I knew his password. It was the birthday of his late mother. He had never changed it. I logged in and went straight to his browser history. It was clean, too clean. I opened the hidden incognito logs. What I found made the theft of the earrings look like petty change. There were dozens of emails from debt collectors, final notices, threats of legal action. But the most damning document was a portable document format file downloaded 3 days ago. It was a loan application for a second mortgage on my house. The application was filled out, my name was listed as the cosigner, and at the bottom, there was a signature. It was my signature, or rather, a shaky, clumsy forgery of it. I scrolled further. There were gambling sites, online poker rooms where hundreds of thousands of dollars had been funneled into the void. Mark was not just retired. He was broke. He had lost everything. His portfolio, his savings, his liquidity. He was drowning in debt, and he had brought his daughter here not to save her, but to use her as a distraction while he stripped my life for parts. I sat back in his leather chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the tears running down my face. I was not crying for the money. I was crying for the woman I had been yesterday. The woman who thought her husband loved her. That woman was dead. The man downstairs was not my partner. He was a parasite. He was gaslighting me to cover his tracks, using my history of mental fragility to invalidate my reality so that when I eventually noticed the money was gone, no one would believe me. He would have me committed, take power of attorney, and sell the house to pay his debts. I heard footsteps approaching the office door. The handle jiggled. Ava, Mark's voice came through the wood, muffled but demanding. Are you in there? Why is the door locked? I wiped my face rapidly. I minimized the windows, leaving a recipe blog open on the screen. I stood up, took a deep breath, and unlocked the door. Mark stood there, looking annoyed. What are you doing? We are waiting for you. We ordered pizza. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had held my hand while I grieved our son. I saw the lines around his eyes, the slight gray in his beard. He looked so normal, so trustworthy. I am sorry, I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing of the storm raging inside me. I was just looking up a recipe for tomorrow. I will be right down. Mark studied my face for a second, searching for a crack. He did not see one. He nodded, satisfied. Do not take too long. Tiffany is starving. He turned and walked away. I watched him go. A cold calm settled over me, heavier and harder than anything I had ever felt. They wanted to play a game? Fine, I would play, but they had made a fatal error. They thought they were playing against a fragile, broken woman. They did not realize that when you break something, you create sharp edges, and I was about to cut them both. The descent was not a steep drop. It was a slow, suffocating slide into a fog I could not wave away. For the next week, my body ceased to belong to me. I would wake up in the morning feeling as though I had swum through miles of dark water. My limbs were heavy, leaden weights that refused to obey the commands of my brain. My mouth tasted constantly of metallic ash. Mark was always there with a glass of orange juice and a concerned smile. Here, drink this, he would say. You look dehydrated. You are working too hard. I drank it. I knew, logically, that I should not. I knew from the toothbrush incident that hygiene and safety were no longer guaranteed in this house. But I had to play the part. If I stopped drinking the juice, if I stopped taking the vitamins he laid out for me, he would know that I knew. I had to let them poison me just enough to lower their guard. But I prayed my tolerance was high enough to keep me from drowning completely. But the chemicals were potent. On Thursday, I walked into the kitchen to find the gas burner on the stove, hissing. The blue flame absent, but the smell of mercaptan filling the room. I stared at the dial, confused. I had not cooked breakfast. I had not even entered the kitchen until this moment. Mark rushed in behind me, grabbing my arm and twisting the dial off. Jesus. Eva, he shouted, fanning the air. Are you trying to kill us? I did not touch that. I stammered, my tongue feeling too thick for my mouth. Mark looked at me, his eyes wide with theatrical fear. I watched you. Eva, I was in the garden. I saw you walk in here, turn it on, and walk out. You were staring right at it. No, I whispered. That is not true. You do not remember? He asked, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. Oh my God, it is happening again. The fugue states. He was rewriting my memory in real time. And the terrifying part was that the drugs made my own recollection so hazy that a tiny sliver of doubt began to bleed in. Had I done it? No. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. The pain sharpened my focus. No, I did not do it, but the world outside our walls did not know that. Saturday night was the annual fundraising gala for the Greenwich Homeowners Association. It was the social event of the season, a night where status was measured in donation amounts and the stiffness of one's smile. I had been on the planning committee for 5 years. I could not miss it. You should not go, Mark said as I applied my makeup with a trembling hand. You are not well. I am fine, I said, staring at my reflection. My pupils were dilated, swallowing the iris. I look fine, Mark Sahil, adjusting his silk tie. Okay, but stay close to me. I do not want you getting overwhelmed. The venue was a ballroom at the country club, glittering with chandeliers and filled with the dull roar of polite conversation. As soon as we stepped inside, the lights seemed to streak and blur. The noise was aggressive, pounding against my temples. I saw Mrs. Vanderwell, the Homeowners Association president, holding court near the Champagne Tower. She was a woman who wielded her influence like a cudgel. I needed to say hello. I needed to show face. I walked toward her, my heels clicking on the polished floor. The floor seemed to tilt slightly to the left. I corrected my balance, but overcorrected. Eva, Mrs. van der Waal beamed, her smile tight. We were wondering if you would make it. I opened my mouth to offer a compliment on the floral arrangements, but the words slurred together. The flowers are saudingholing. 2 hash is greater than lovely. I managed, but it came out sounding like I had swallowed a handful of marbles. Mrs. van der Waal's smile faltered. She glanced at Mark. I reached out to steady myself on the table, but my depth perception was gone. My hand missed the edge of the table and struck a tray of red wine glasses held by a passing waiter. The crash was deafening. 3 glasses shattered. A wave of crimson liquid splashed outward, soaking the pristine white hem of Mrs. van der Waal's designer gown. The room went silent. The music seemed to stop. Every eye in the ballroom turned to me. Oh my God, I gasped. Stepping back, my feet crunched on broken glass. I slipped, flailing, and Mark caught me by the waist. I am so sorry, I tried to say, but the panic constricted my throat. Look at her. Someone whispered loudly nearby. Is she drunk? It is barely 8 o'clock. Another voice muttered, that is shameful. No, I shouted, the injustice of it burning through the fog. I am not drunk. My outburst only made it worse. I sounded belligerent, unhinged. Mark pulled me tighter against him, turning his face to the crowd. His expression was a masterpiece of tragic nobility. Please, everyone, give her some space, Mark announced, his voice projecting clearly across the silent room. I am so sorry about this. Eva has been Sautsing howling. 2 hash is greater than struggling with her medication adjustments lately. She is not herself. Please, forgive us. He looked at Mrs. Vanderwaal with soulful, apologetic eyes. I will pay for the dress. Beatrice, I am taking her home now. Come on. Darling, he was not defending me. He was confirming their worst suspicions. He was publicly labeling me as unstable, medicated, and unreliable. He was invalidating my credibility in front of the very people who would be my character witnesses if this ever went to court. I looked around the room. I saw pity. I saw disgust. I saw people looking at their phones, likely texting the gossip to those who were not present. Let me go. I hissed at Mark as he steered me toward the exit. I am not sick. Shh. Mark soothed, gripping my arm so hard his fingers dug into my bicep. Stop making a scene. Eva, you are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing me. We walked out into the cool night air. Tiffany was waiting in the car, sitting in the back seat. As Mark shoved me into the passenger side, I caught a glimpse of her face in the rearview mirror. She was smiling. It was a cold, satisfied smile. You did good, Dad, she said softly. Mark started the engine. He did not look at me. He just stared straight ahead, a small, tight smile playing on his lips. See, he said to me, his voice devoid of the warmth he had feigned inside. You cannot handle the real world anymore. Eva, you are a liability. Maybe it is time we talked about getting you some professional help. Somewhere quiet, somewhere secure. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the window as the car pulled away. The tears finally came, hot and angry. I was spiraling, just as they planned. They had stripped me of my dignity, my credibility, and my physical autonomy. But as the streetlights flickered past, a single thought anchored me in the spinning darkness. They thought I was broken. They thought the game was over, but I was still here. And tomorrow, I would stop drinking the juice. Tomorrow, the fog would lift, and when it did, there would be hell to pay. The house was silent, but it was the silence of a held breath, not of peace. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. We had returned from the gala 3 hours ago. Mark had been the picture of the doting, exhausted husband. He had helped me change out of my wine-stained gown, wiping my face with a warm washcloth, murmuring soft reassurances that sounded rehearsed. Then came the ritual. Here, he had said, placing a small blue pill in a glass of water on the nightstand. Just a sedative to help you sleep off the stress. You had a big episode tonight. Eva, you need to rest the brain. I had looked at the pill. It was not my usual prescription. It was rounder, darker. I took it. I put it in my mouth, took a sip of water, and threw my head back. Mark watched my throat move. He smiled, satisfied, and turned off the lamp, but the pill was currently dissolving bitterly under my tongue. I lay still in the darkness for 45 minutes, controlling my breathing, waiting until Mark's snoring settled into a deep, rhythmic rumble. Only then did I move. I spat the partially dissolved chemical into a tissue and hid it inside my pillowcase. My mouth tasted like chalk and battery acid, but my mind was razor sharp. I slid out of bed. My bare feet made no sound on the thick Persian rug. I did not know where I was going, but a pull, magnetic and sickening, drew me toward the guest wing. A sliver of light was cutting across the hallway floor from under Tiffany's door. I crept closer. The door was not latched. I pressed my eye to the narrow gap between the door and the frame. The breath trapped in my lungs turned to ice. Tiffany was sitting at the vanity table, illuminated by the harsh white glow of a ring light. But it was not Tiffany I was looking at. She was wearing my emerald green silk wrap dress, the one I had worn to my 40th birthday party. On her head sat a wig, a perfect, terrifying replica of my chestnut bob cut. She had contoured her face to look older, sharper. She looked like me. It was a caricature, a distorted, mocking mirror image. But the resemblance was undeniable. She was hunched over a stack of papers. In her hand was my favorite fountain pen. She moved the pen across the paper with intense concentration. Then she lifted the page, examined it, and crumpled it up, tossing it onto a pile of trash on the floor. "Damn it," she muttered. "The V is too loopy." The door to the ensuite bathroom opened, and Mark walked into the frame. He was holding a beer. He did not look surprised to see his daughter dressed as his wife. He looked bored. "Keep practicing," Mark said, taking a swig of beer. "The bank needs the authorization forms by Monday if we want that wire transfer to clear for the boat." My knees almost gave out. A boat. They were buying a boat while I was supposedly losing my mind. "My hand hurts, Dad," Tiffany whined, spinning around in the chair. The wig swished just like my hair would. "Why can we not just wait until you get the paper that says she is crazy? Then you can sign everything. Conservatorship takes time." "Tiff," Mark explained, his voice patient, as if he were teaching a child how to tie her shoes. "We have the incident at the gala tonight, which was perfect. By the way, everyone saw her stumble, but we need at least 2 more public breakdowns before Dr. Salinger will sign off on the involuntary commitment order. Once she is in the facility, I get power of attorney, but until then, we need cash. 2 more breakdowns." They had a quota. They had a schedule for my destruction. Tiffany laughed, spinning back to the mirror. She reapplied a coat of my signature red lipstick. "She looked so pathetic tonight, did she not?" Tiffany giggled, screaming about the wine. "She really thinks she is losing it. How long until the drugs make her brain mush permanently?" Mark shrugged. "Who cares? As long as she can drool on a piece of paper when the notary comes, it does not matter. She is a cash cow, honey, and once we have the control, we can stick her in that state-run facility upstate. It is cheap. That leaves more for us." I stopped breathing. The pain I had expected to feel, the heartbreak, the betrayal, did not come. Instead, something inside me snapped. It was a clean, sharp break, like a dry twig in winter. For 20 years, I had defined myself by my capacity to love and nurture. I had been a wife, a stepmother, a creator of beautiful spaces. I had believed in the sanctity of family. Tonight, listening to my husband discuss discarding me into a state asylum to fund his lifestyle. That woman died. I looked at Mark. I saw his paunch, his weak chin, the greedy glint in his eyes. He was not a monster. He was something far more pathetic. He was a parasite. He was a tick burrowed into my skin, bloated with my blood, convincing himself he was the host. And Tiffany? She was just a hollow shell, filling her emptiness with my identity because she had none of her own. I stepped back from the door, moving with a ghost-like precision I did not know I possessed. I returned to the master bedroom. I went to the bathroom and brushed my teeth, scrubbing away the taste of the pill and the taste of my old life. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were dark, rimmed with exhaustion, but the fear was gone. The confusion was gone. I walked back to the bed and lay down beside the man who planned to destroy me. I listened to his breathing. It sounded like a countdown, 2 more breakdowns. He had said he wanted a show. I would give him a show, but it would not be the tragedy he had written for me. I turned my head and stared at the back of his neck, visualizing exactly where the vulnerability lay. Sleep well, Mark, I thought, my internal voice cold and steady, devoid of any emotion other than determination. Because when you wake up, you are no longer the director of this play. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I began to plan. Sunday morning arrived with a gray, oppressive light that filtered through the heavy silk curtains of the master bedroom. I woke before the alarm, my body rigid, my mind already racing through the inventory of my performance for the day. For the next 12 hours, I had to become the woman Mark wanted me to be. I had to be fragile. I had to be confused. I had to be the perfect victim. I dragged myself out of bed, deliberately messing up my hair and leaving my silk robe slightly askew. When I walked into the kitchen, Mark was already there, brewing coffee. The smell of roasted beans, once a comfort, now turned my stomach. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Mark said, turning with a bright, plastic smile. "You slept late. How are you feeling after last night?" I blinked slowly, letting my eyes lose focus. "I, Xiaoyuting Haoling. 2 is greater than I feel heavy. Did something happen last night? My head hurts." Mark's expression shifted instantly to one of practiced concern. He walked over and placed a hand on my forehead. His palm felt like a brand. "You had a little episode at the gala. Honey, you were shouting at Mrs. van der Waal, but do not worry about it. Everyone understands you are not well." I looked down at the granite countertop, hiding the flash of rage that threatened to ignite behind my eyes. I did not shout at anyone. I was drugged. "I am sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I do not remember. It is okay," Mark soothed, guiding me to a stool. "Just sit. I made you a special smoothie. Lots of antioxidants." He slid a glass of thick, green liquid toward me. I knew what was in it. I could practically smell the crushed sedatives masking the kale and apple. "Thank you," I said. I waited until he turned back to the stove to flip an omelet. In one fluid motion, I poured the majority of the smoothie into the potted fern sitting on the windowsill behind me. I brought the nearly empty glass back to my lips just as he turned around. "Yum," I said, wiping a fake green mustache from my lip. Tiffany walked in 10 minutes later. She did not look like the glamorous mimic from the night before. She looked hungover, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors. "Morning, Dad. Who is the zombie?" she asked, gesturing at me with a half-eaten piece of toast. "Be nice, Tiffany," Mark chided gently, placing a plate of eggs in front of her. "Eva is having a rough morning." I stared at the table, letting my mouth hang open slightly. I focused on the grain of the wood, counting the rings to keep from lunging across the table and strangling her. "I am going to lie down," I mumbled, sliding off the stool. "The light is too bright." "Good idea," Mark said. "Rest up. I have to run to the club for a few hours to meet with Xiaoyuting Ling. 2 dièse est supérieur à un client." I knew he did not have clients. He was going to gamble, or perhaps meet with the corrupt doctor he had mentioned. I climbed the stairs, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. I went into the bedroom and waited. 10 minutes later, I heard the garage door open and the rumble of Mark's SUV fading down the driveway. Tiffany was still downstairs, likely glued to the television. The house was mine. I moved with a speed that defied my earlier performance. I went straight to Mark's side of the closet. I needed physical evidence. Digital footprints were good, but I needed something I could hold in my hand, something a jury could see. I dug through his golf bag. Nothing. I checked the pockets of his winter coats. Nothing. Then I saw the shoebox on the top shelf, tucked behind a stack of old sweaters. It was an old box for dress shoes he had thrown away years ago. I pulled it down. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I opened the lid. Inside, nestled among loose receipts and poker chips, was a small, orange prescription bottle. The label had been peeled off. I opened it. Inside were dozens of small, blue pills, the same ones he had given me last night. I took one out and wrapped it in a tissue, shoving it into my pocket. I would send this to a lab on Monday, but beneath the bottle lay a thick, folded envelope. The return address was a private lending firm in New Jersey, a company with a name that sounded predatory even on paper. I unfolded the document. It was a loan agreement, a second mortgage on the house. My eyes scanned the numbers, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The loan amount was for $50,000. The interest rate was astronomical, bordering on illegal, but it was the collateral that made me gag. Property address, 142 Willow Creek Lane, Greenwich, Connecticut. My house, the house my father bought in 1982. The house where my mother taught me to play the piano. The house that was legally solely in my name. Protected, or so I thought, by the prenup. I looked at the bottom of the page. There, next to Mark's signature, was mine, Ava Vance. The signature was a good forgery, better than the practice sheets I had seen Tiffany working on. It was looped and elegant, almost identical to the way I signed checks. But there was a hesitation in the capital E, a slight tremor in the ink that betrayed the hand of a fraud. The date on the document was 3 days ago. They had already done it. They had leveraged my legacy, my sanctuary, to fund $50,000 worth of Sauting Haling. 2 hash is greater than what? I dug deeper into the box and found the wire transfer confirmation. Recipient, Tiffany Marie Vance. Memo, medical expenses. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Medical expenses. She was spending it on designer clothes, nightclub tables, and God knows what else. While my home, the only thing I had left of my parents, was now property of a loan shark in New Jersey. I sank to the floor of the closet, clutching the papers to my chest. The tragedy of it washed over me like a tidal wave. This was not just a heist. This was an annihilation. Mark did not just want my money. He wanted to erase me. He was willing to destroy my credit, my reputation, and my sanity. He was willing to render me homeless. I thought about the last 5 years, the vacations we took, the nights we spent drinking wine by the fire, the way he held me when I cried for our lost baby. Was any of it real? I looked at the forged signature again. No, none of it was real. He had been studying me the entire time. He had been learning my signature, learning my weaknesses, learning exactly how to break me so he could pick the gold from the rubble. I felt a profound, aching loneliness. I was an orphan again. I was a widow to a living husband. The man I loved was a fiction, a character played by a sociopath. I heard a noise from downstairs, the sound of glass breaking. I shoved the papers and the pill bottle back into the box and returned it to the shelf. I wiped my face, composing my mask. I walked downstairs. Tiffany was in the living room. She had knocked over a vase, a Ming vase replica that was not particularly valuable. But one I liked. She looked up at me, not with apology, but with annoyance. "Your stupid table is uneven," she snapped. It just fell. I looked at the shattered porcelain on the floor. It was a metaphor for my life. Broken pieces scattered on the floor by a careless child. With no one to clean it up but me, I looked at her. I saw the $50,000 she had stolen draped over her body in the form of new jewelry and clothes. I saw the lien on my house in her smirk. "It is okay, Tiffany," I said, my voice soft. "Dead. Accidents happen." She rolled her eyes and went back to her phone. I turned and walked into the kitchen. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. The sadness was receding, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They had taken my past. They had taken my trust. They had taken $50,000, but they would not take my future. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. It was the number of my father's old lawyer, a man named Arthur, who was known in legal circles as the Shark of Greenwich. He answered on the second ring. "Arthur," I said, keeping my voice low so the girl in the living room could not hear. "It is Eva Vance. I need you to clear your schedule for tomorrow. We have a situation." "What kind of situation, Eva?" Arthur asked, his voice gravelly and alert. "A criminal one," I said. "I am being robbed, and I am going to burn them to the ground." I hung up. The tragedy was over. The war had begun. Tuesday evening arrived with the weight of a gathering storm. The air in the house was stagnant, heavy with the scent of expensive cologne and the underlying musk of treachery. I stood in my dressing room, staring at my reflection. For the past week, I had worn nothing but oversized sweaters and pajamas, playing the role of the disintegrating wife. Tonight, that woman was gone. In her place stood Eva Vance, the owner of this estate, the woman who had built a career on structure and steel. I fastened the buttons of my tailored black blazer. It was sharp, architectural, a piece of armor designed to intimidate. I applied my lipstick, a deep, blood-red shade that I had not worn since before the baby died. I brushed my hair back, revealing my face fully. There would be no hiding tonight. Downstairs, the stage was set. Mark had told me earlier, with his faux gentle voice, that a few close friends and a specialist were coming over for a small intervention. He framed it as an act of love, a necessary step to help me manage my deteriorating condition. I checked the time on my phone. 7 o'clock. I could hear the murmur of voices rising from the formal living room, the clinking of crystal glasses, the soft, serious tones of people discussing a tragedy. They were discussing me as if I were already dead, or at least effectively gone. I picked up my phone and a sleek, black folder containing the documents Arthur and I had finalized that afternoon. My heart was beating a slow, a steady rhythm against my ribs. It was not fear. It was the cold, calculated rhythm of an executioner. I opened the bedroom door and walked to the top of the grand staircase. Below, the living room was dimly lit, creating an atmosphere of somber intimacy. Mark stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, the other holding a glass of scotch. He looked the part of the grieving patriarch perfectly. Around him sat Mrs. Vanderwall from the Homeowners Association, looking suitably grave. Dr. Salinger, a psychiatrist Mark had been playing golf with for months, and Mr. Henderson, a notary public who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Tiffany was perched on the arm of the sofa, wearing a modest dress that I knew she hated, trying to look like the concerned daughter. I paused on the landing, listening. It has been the hardest year of my life, Mark was saying, his voice cracking with emotion. Watching her slip away like this. 小雨静后零 dose. The paranoia, the memory loss. Last week, she almost burned the house down. I cannot sleep at night, terrified she is going to hurt herself. Oh, Mark, you are a saint for standing by her. Mrs. Vonderwell cooed, shaking her head. Most men would have left. I promised to love her in sickness and in health, Mark said, looking down at the floor. But we are at a breaking point. Dr. Salinger agrees that for her own safety and to protect the assets she is recklessly spending, I need to take full guardianship just until she stabilizes. We just want her to get better. Tiffany chimed in, her voice trembling. I love Eva. It hurts to see her scream at me for things I did not do. I gripped the banister. The audacity was breathtaking. They were not just lying. They were performing a masterclass in character assassination. I began to descend. My heels struck the hardwood steps with a deliberate, rhythmic clack. 1, 2, 3. The sound cut through their conversation like a gunshot. Heads turned. Mark looked up, his expression shifting from tragic sadness to genuine confusion. And then, for a split second, pura panic. I did not look like the disheveled, medicated wreck he had described. I looked impeccable. I walked with the grace of a predator entering a clearing. Ava? Mark said, setting his glass down a little too hard. Honey, what are you doing down here? We were just... 小雨静后零 2# is greater than we were just talking about how to help you. I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked into the center of the room. I did not sit. I stood tall, towering over them where they sat on the low furniture. Good evening, everyone, I said. My voice was clear, resonant, without a hint of the slur Mark had conditioned them to expect. I apologize for interrupting this little 小雨静后零 2# is greater than performance, but I believe the subject of your conversation should be present when you discuss stripping her of her civil rights. Ava, please, Mark said, rushing toward me with his hands raised in a placating gesture. You are having an episode. You are confused. Look at your eyes. You are manic. Let me take you upstairs. Do not touch me. I said. I did not shout. I did not recoil. I simply spoke the command with such icy authority that Mark froze in his tracks. I turned to the guests. Mrs. Vonderwell, Dr. Salinger, Mr. Henderson, thank you for coming. My husband has gathered you here to witness my decline, to sign affidavits stating that I am mentally incompetent, and to notarize a power of attorney transferring control of my estate to him. Is that correct? Dr. Salinger cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Vance, Mark has expressed deep concern about your behavior. The incident at the gala. 小雨静后零 2# is greater than the memory gaps. We just want to ensure you get the care you need, the care I need. I repeated, a dry smile touching my lips, or the access to my bank accounts that he needs. Tiffany jumped up. Stop it. You are embarrassing, Dad. See, she is paranoid. She thinks everyone is stealing from her. I looked at Tiffany, the girl who had worn my clothes. I used my name and mocked my existence. Sit down, Tiffany, I said softly. The show is about to start. I pulled my phone out and tapped the screen. I had already synced it to the large 85-inch smart television mounted above the fireplace behind Mark. The screen flickered to life. "What is she doing?" Mark hissed, looking at the notary. "She is delusional. Ignore this." On the screen, a high-definition video began to play. It was the footage from the camera hidden in the guest room. The room went silent. On the screen, Tiffany was sitting at the vanity. She was wearing my green dress and the wig that made her look like me. The timestamp in the corner read 1:45 in the morning. 3 days ago. The audio was crisp and clear. "The V is too loopy." Tiffany's voice rang out from the speakers, echoing in the silent living room. Then, Mark walked into the frame on the screen. "Keep practicing," the digital Mark said, swigging his beer. "The bank needs the authorization forms by Monday if we want that wire transfer to clear for the boat." I heard Mrs. Vanderwell gasp. It was a sharp intake of breath that sounded loud in the room. Mark's face drained of all color. He looked at the screen, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. "Conservatorship takes time, Tiff." The recording continued. "We have the incident at the gala tonight, which was perfect. By the way, Xiao Yu Ting Haoling, 2# is greater than once she is in the facility. I get power of attorney. Xiao Yu Ting Haoling, 2# is greater than she is a cash cow. Honey." I paused the video. The image of Mark calling me a cash cow froze on the giant screen, looming over the real Mark, who was now trembling. I looked at the guests. Mr. Henderson, the notary, was hurriedly packing his stamp into his briefcase. Dr. Salinger looked like he wanted to vanish into the upholstery. "That," I said, pointing to the screen, "is not a hallucination. That is my husband and his daughter, conspiring to commit fraud, forgery, and unlawful imprisonment. That is fake," Tiffany screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "She used artificial intelligence. Deep fakes. Everyone knows you can make those now. She is crazy." I ignored her and opened the black folder. I tossed a stack of papers onto the coffee table in front of Mrs. Vanderwall. "And these?" I asked. "Are these deep fakes too?" Mrs. Vanderwall picked up the papers. Her hands shook as she read. "These are Xiao Yu Ting Haoling. Those loan documents," she whispered. "A second mortgage. $50,000. Signed by Xiao Yu Ting Haoling, R. Ting Hao Dayu." She looked up at me, then at Mark with pure disgust. "Signed by Eva Vance, but dated 3 days ago. I was in Westport with a client all day. The global positioning system data from my car confirms it. And here," I pointed to the next page, "is the wire transfer sending the funds to a private account held by Tiffany Vance." Mark lunged it. It was a desperate, animalistic move. He tried to grab the papers from the table. "Give me those. You bitch. You hacked my computer." But I was faster. I stepped back, and David, my private security contractor who had been waiting in the kitchen, I stepped into the doorway. Mark stopped, seeing the broad-shouldered man blocking his path. "It is over, Mark," I said. "The act, the gaslighting, the drugs." I pulled out the toxicology report that had been emailed to me that morning. "I sent the pills you have been feeding me to a lab," I said, holding the paper up for the doctor to see. "Benzodiazepines mixed with hallucinogens. You have been systematically poisoning me to induce symptoms of psychosis. That is not just fraud, Mark. That is attempted bodily harm." That is domestic abuse. Dr. Salinger stood up, his face pale. I, Sao Ting Haling, 2# is greater than I had no idea. Mrs. Vance, Mark told me you were refusing medication. If this is true, Sao Ting Haling, 2# is greater than I cannot be a part of this. You are already a part of it, I said coldly. But you can explain that to the medical board. Right now, I suggest you all leave, except for Mark and Tiffany. The guests scrambled. Mrs. Vanderwall looked at me with tears in her eyes. Eva, I am so sorry. I did not know. Save it. Beatrice, I said, just go. Within 30 seconds, the room was empty of spectators. It was just me, Mark, Tiffany, and David standing guard by the door. The silence that followed was different from before. It was the silence of a ruin. Mark slumped onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. The grieving husband mask was gone, replaced by the terrifying reality of a man caught in a trap of his own making. Tiffany, however, was not defeated. She was enraged. She stood up, her face twisted into a snarl of entitlement. You selfish witch, she screamed, stomping her foot. So what if we took the money? You have everything. You have this huge house, millions of dollars, and you just hoard it. Dad is your husband. He deserves that money. I deserve it. I looked at her, truly looked at her. I saw a 24-year-old woman who had never been told no, who believed the world owed her a living simply because she existed. You deserve nothing, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than her screaming. You are a thief, a parasite. You came into my home, ate my food, stole my identity, and tried to have me locked away in an asylum. So, Tiffany spat, you are old. You do not need it anymore. You were supposed to just fade away. Mark looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Eva, Sao Ting Haling, 2# is greater than please. We can explain. The gambling, Sao Ting Haling, 2# is greater than I got in over my head. I was scared. They were going to hurt me. I did it for us, to save us. For us, I laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. You were going to put me in a state facility. Mark, you called me a cash cow. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending this was about love. I walked over to the fireplace and picked up the poker. I did not raise it, but I held it, feeling the cold iron in my hand. I have already called the police, I said. They are about 5 minutes away. Mark's head snapped up. No, Eva. No, you cannot do that. I am your husband. Think about the scandal. Think about your reputation. My reputation? I asked, raising an eyebrow. My reputation just survived your attempt to destroy it. You, however, are about to become very famous. I looked at Tiffany. And you, I said, you wanted to be me so badly? You wanted my life? Well, congratulations. You are about to get the full experience of consequences. Dad, do something. Tiffany shrieked, grabbing Mark's arm. She called the cops. We have to go. Mark stood up, swaying slightly. Eva, honey, listen. We can work this out. I will sign a postnuptial. I will pay it back. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please. I looked at the man I had married. I looked for a shred of the love I once felt. I searched my heart for pity, for hesitation, for anything soft. I found nothing. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with every second. Blue and red lights began to flash against the sheer curtains of the living room window, painting the walls in the colors of emergency. There is nothing to work out. Mark, I said, turning my back on them to face the window. Get out of my house. The pounding on the front door began. The flashing lights of the police cruisers did not just illuminate my driveway. They dissected the darkness of the entire neighborhood. In Greenwich, silence is a currency, and privacy is the ultimate luxury. Tonight, I had bankrupt us of both. I stood in the foyer, my arms crossed over my chest, watching as 3 uniformed officers marched into the sanctuary Mark had tried to steal from me. David, my security contractor, stood aside, briefing the lead officer in low, professional tones, handing over the folder of evidence that contained the video files, the forged loan documents, and the toxicology report. Mark was pacing near the fireplace, sweating through his dress shirt. When the officer approached him, Mark attempted to compose his face into a mask of reasonable authority, but the cracks were too deep to hide. Officer, thank God you are here, Mark said, extending a hand that the officer ignored. My wife is having a severe mental health crisis. She is delusional. She has locked us in here and is making wild accusations. The officer, a man with a jaw like granite and eyes that had seen far too many domestic disputes to be easily swayed, looked at Mark, then at me. Mrs. Vance? The officer asked. Are you Eva Vance? I am, I replied, stepping forward. I am the homeowner, and I am the one who called you. That man is Mark Vance. He is currently trespassing, as I have revoked his permission to be on this property. Furthermore, I am pressing charges for identity theft, forgery, and administration of a noxious substance. Mark let out a choked laugh. See, noxious substance? She is hysterical. The officer held up a hand to silence him. Sir, we have reviewed the preliminary evidence provided by your wife's legal counsel. We have probable cause to believe a felony has been committed. What? Mark stammered, the color draining from his face. That is absurd. This is a domestic dispute. Officer Miller, please place your hands behind your back, the officer said, reaching for his belt. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and mechanical, a sound that signaled the end of Mark's carefully curated life. Tiffany, who had been cowering on the sofa, suddenly realized the gravity of the situation. She scrambled up, trying to bolt toward the kitchen door. 2 other officers intercepted her. Do not touch me, she screamed, thrashing like a trapped animal. I did not do anything. It was his idea. He made me do it. Mark whipped his head around, staring at his daughter with pure venom. Shut up, Tiffany. Do not say a word. He told me to wear the wig, Tiffany yelled, her voice shrill and breaking. She looked at the officers, her eyes wide with panic. He said she was crazy. He said we were just getting what was ours. I am just a kid. I did not sign the papers. You forged the signature. Tiffany, Mark roared back, losing all composure. You practiced for weeks. Do not try to pin this on me. You ungrateful little brat. I watched them turn on each other. It had taken less than 5 minutes for their alliance to crumble under the weight of consequences. They were not partners. They were rats in a sinking ship, climbing over each other to breathe. Let us go, the officer said, guiding Mark roughly toward the door. The walk from the front door to the police cars was the longest walk of Mark's life. I followed them out onto the porch, wrapping my arms against the chill of the night air. The street was lined with spectators. In our neighborhood, people did not come out to gawk openly. They stood behind their manicured hedges or peered through the slats of their blinds. But tonight, the commotion was too great. The lights were too bright. Mrs. Vanderwall was standing on the sidewalk with her husband, clutching her shawl tight around her throat. The neighbors from across the street, a venture capitalist and his wife, were watching from their driveway. A group of teenagers had stopped their cars to film the scene on their phones. Mark saw them. He saw the phones. He saw the judgment in the eyes of the people he had spent 5 years trying to impress. He hung his head, trying to hide his face from the glare of the strobe lights. But it was too late. Everyone saw the handcuffs. Everyone saw him being shoved into the back of the squad car like a common criminal. Tiffany was less dignified. As they pushed her into the second car, she spotted me standing on the porch. "You witch!" she screamed, her face contorted and ugly under the harsh blue light. "You ruined everything. I hate you. I hope you die alone in this big empty house." The officer slammed the door, cutting off her screeching. I stood there for a long moment, meeting the gaze of my neighbors. I did not look away. I did not cry. I stood tall, the mistress of my own domain, letting them see exactly who was left standing. Mrs. Vanderwall caught my eye. She hesitated, then gave me a small, somber nod. It was an acknowledgement. The rumor mill would spin by morning, but the narrative had shifted. I was no longer the crazy wife. I was the survivor. The police cars pulled away, their sirens chirping once before fading into the night. The red and blue lights vanished, leaving the street bathed in the soft, yellow glow of the street lamps. I turned and walked back into my house. The silence that greeted me was profound. It was not the predatory silence of the past week. It was a clean silence. The air felt lighter, scrubbed of the tension and the lies. I walked into the living room. The remnants of the confrontation were still there. The shattered vase, the papers scattered on the table. I picked up the forged loan document. I looked at my name, written by a girl who thought she could steal my life because she felt entitled to it. I ripped the paper in half, then in half again. I walked to the fireplace, where the embers of the gas fire were still glowing. I tossed the confetti of paper into the flames and watched them curl, blacken, and disappear. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a friend who lived 3 streets over. Ifa. Is everything okay? I just saw the police. Twitter is saying Mark was arrested. The news was already traveling faster than the police convoy. By tomorrow morning, everyone at the country club, everyone at the design firm, everyone in our social circle would know Mark's reputation was incinerated. He would not just be broke. He would be a pariah. In our world, you could recover from bankruptcy, but you could not recover from the public humiliation of defrauding your wife and being dragged out in cuffs. I did not reply to the text. I placed my phone on the mantel. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water from the tap. I drank it deeply, savoring the cool, clean taste. It was just water, no sedatives, no poison. I was alone. The house was empty. But for the first time in years, I did not feel lonely. I felt safe. I looked out the kitchen window at the dark outline of the garden. The storm was over. The wreckage was vast, and there would be legal battles ahead, depositions, and the messy business of untangling our finances. But the hardest part was done. I had cut the cancer out. Now, I could finally begin to heal. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation and the arrest evaporated within 48 hours, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. Victory, I discovered, did not taste sweet. It tasted like cold coffee and stale air. The week following the arrest was a blur of legal bureaucracy. I spent more time in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Arthur's law firm than I did in my own home. Arthur was efficient, a shark in a three-piece suit who took a grim pleasure in dismantling Mark's life because Mark had attempted to defraud me. The infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement was technically irrelevant, but the criminal misconduct clause was the nail in his coffin. Arthur explained it to me on a rainy Tuesday morning, sliding a stack of documents across the polished table. He leaves with nothing. Eva, Arthur said, tapping the paper with his pen. Absolutely nothing. The prenup is ironclad regarding criminal actions against the spouse. He forfeits his claim to the marital assets, the alimony, and the pension sharing. I looked at the papers. It was just ink on a page. Legal jargon that dissolved a 5-year marriage into a series of voided checks. And the debt? I asked, my voice rasping slightly. The $50,000 they stole? The loan shark in New Jersey? Arthur, Sihil, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. That is stickier, because your signature was forged. We have filed an affidavit of fraud. You are not liable for the loan. The lender will have to go after Mark and Tiffany personally. Since they have no assets, they will likely face additional lawsuits on top of the criminal charges. They dug a hole so deep they will never see the sun again. I nodded, feeling a strange lack of satisfaction. I should have been happy. I had won. I had protected my inheritance. But as I drove home that afternoon, navigating the winding roads of Greenwich under a slate-gray sky, I felt only a profound numbness. The house was waiting for me. It loomed on the hill, magnificent and imposing. But as I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer, the silence hit me like a physical blow. For years, I had complained about the noise Mark made, the television blaring sports, his phone calls, his heavy footsteps. Now, the quiet was absolute. It was the silence of a mausoleum. I walked through the rooms, tracing my hand along the furniture. I went into the guest wing. The police had turned Tiffany's room upside down looking for evidence, leaving clothes and makeup scattered across the floor. I saw a tube of my expensive lipstick, crushed into the beige carpet by a careless boot. I stared at it. This was where she had sat, wearing my face, practicing my signature. This was where they had laughed about putting me in an asylum. I felt a sudden wave of nausea. I could not breathe in here. The air felt recycled, tainted by the months of deceit that had festered within these walls. Every corner held a memory that was now corrupted. The kitchen where Mark made me coffee was now the place where he poisoned me. The living room where we hosted Christmas parties was now the stage of his humiliation. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of wine. My hand trembled, and a drop of red liquid splashed onto the counter. I stared at it, paralyzed by the memory of the gala, of the wine on Mrs. Vanderwell's dress, of the way Mark had gripped my arm. The phone rang. It was the landline, a number only a few people had. I stared at the handset on the wall. It rang 4 times before I picked it up. Saluting Howling. Due cancelletto e maggiority, hello? This is a collect call from the Fairfield County Correctional Center. A robotic voice announced. From an inmate, Mark Vance. To accept charges, press 1. My finger hovered over the button. I should hang up. I should rip the cord from the wall. But a morbid curiosity, A need for finality made me press the key. Ava? Mark's voice came through the line. Tinny and desperate. He sounded small. He sounded broken. Ava, thank God. I have been trying to call you for 2 days. You have to help me. The public defender is an idiot. He says I am looking at 5 to 10 years. Ava, you cannot let that happen. I listened to him. There was no apology. There was no remorse. There was only the frantic, selfish panic of a man who had realized the game was over. You tried to have me committed. Mark, I said, my voice flat. You tried to erase me. I was desperate. Mark cried. It was the gambling debts. They were going to break my legs. Ava, I did not want to hurt you. I just needed the money. I would have gotten you out of the facility eventually. I swear, we were a team. Remember? A team. The word hung in the air, grotesque and absurd. You drug your teammates. Mark, I asked softly, you steal their identity? You gaslight them until they question their own sanity? Eva, please, I am scared. It is terrible in here. I need bail money. Just post the bond. I will sign whatever you want. I will leave the state. Just get me out. I closed my eyes. I pictured the man I had married, the man who had held me when I lost our son. I tried to find him in the voice on the phone, but he was not there. Perhaps he never had been. I am not your bank. Mark, I said, and I am certainly not your wife anymore. Eva, wait, do not hang up. You owe me. I took care of you when you were sick. I opened my eyes. I looked out the window at the sprawling lawn, the empty driveway, the cold sky. You made me sick. Mark, I said. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could still hear him shouting my name. A tiny, insect-like sound coming from the receiver. I pressed the button to end the call. Then, I unplugged the phone line from the wall jack. I stood there in the silence, holding the dead wire in my hand. It was done. The link was severed. But as I looked around my beautiful, empty kitchen, I realized that severing the link was not enough. The ghost of him was everywhere. The stain of his betrayal had seeped into the drywall, into the floorboards, into the very foundation of the house. I could not scrub it out. I could not renovate it away. I set the wine glass down. Unfinished, I walked to the drawer where I kept my contacts and pulled out a business card I had not looked at in years. It was the number for a real estate agent, the best in Connecticut. I was safe. I was wealthy. I was vindicated. But I could not live here. Not for one more night. The espresso sitting on the small marble table in front of me was dark and bitter, a perfect match for the November chill hanging over the streets of Paris. I wrapped my cashmere scarf tighter around my neck and watched the people passing by on the Boulevard Saint-Germain. They looked so unburdened, so light. For the first time in 20 years, I felt like one of them. The house in Greenwich was gone. I had sold it 3 weeks after the arrest. I did not wait for the market to peak. I did not haggle over the price. I sold it to a young family from New York who saw only the beautiful architecture and the manicured gardens, unaware of the ghosts that lurked in the guest wing or the poison that had stained the kitchen granite. When I signed the closing documents, I did not feel a pang of loss. I felt like a diver cutting away a heavy weight belt to keep from drowning. I picked up my phone. There was a new email from Arthur. The subject line read, "Status update, Vance versus Vance." I tapped it open. A grim smile touched my lips as I read the details. It was a bloodbath. Mark and Tiffany were not just facing criminal charges from the state. They were now suing each other in civil court. Mark was claiming that he was a victim of elder abuse, arguing that his manipulative daughter had coerced him into the scheme to pay off her debts. Tiffany, in turn, was painting a picture of a predatory father who had groomed her into a life of crime, claiming she was a pawn in his master plan to steal my fortune. They were cannibals. Stripped of my money and my protection, they had turned on each other with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold. They were tearing each other apart, dollar by non-existent dollar, desperate to reduce their own prison sentences by incriminating the other. Arthur wrote that Mark had tried to reach out again, begging for a character reference to secure a plea deal. I deleted the email without finishing it. I was not innocent in this. I knew that now. My crime was not theft or fraud, but a willful blindness. I had been so desperate to fill the silence of my life, so desperate to be loved, that I had invited the wolves in and set the table for them. I had ignored the red flags because I wanted the fairy tale. That was my flaw. That was my sin. But I had paid my penance. I had paid for it with my sanity, my security, and my heart. The waiter approached my table, placing a small bill on the marble surface. I looked at the total. It was insignificant, but as I reached into my bag, my hand brushed against the leather of a new wallet. It was not a Hermes. It was not a status symbol. It was just leather. I pulled out my pen, the same pen Tiffany had tried to use to forge my name. I looked at the signature line on the receipt. For weeks, they had tried to steal this signature. They had practiced it, traced it, and tried to weaponize it to destroy me. They had called me crazy. They had told the world I was broken, unreliable, a woman whose mind was dissolving like sugar in hot water. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed smoothly, dark and permanent. Sao Yu Tsing Hao Ling, Do dièse est supérieur à Eva Vance. The letters were sharp. The loops were precise. There was no tremor in my hand. I left a generous tip, stood up, and walked out into the gray Parisian afternoon. I was alone. Yes, I would likely be alone for a long time. But as I merged into the crowd, I realized that solitude was not the same as loneliness. Solitude was the price of freedom, and for the first time in my life, I was more than willing to pay the bill.